You get older, your brain doesn't maintain itself the way it used to, and mushrooms could be a key to keeping your brain healthy. People have known about the medicinal value of mushrooms for centuries, and academic research, mostly on lion's mane mushrooms, seems to support the generational knowledge on the topic. Through studies in individual cells, in rodents, and in humans, scientists have found that specific compounds in lion's mane mushrooms stimulate nerves and brain cells to grow and keep them alive longer. And labs across the world are now uncovering some important clues as to why mushrooms can be so beneficial. Under usual circumstances, many different cells in your body, including neurons and other brain cells, grow and survive thanks to the work of nerve growth factors. These are proteins that your body makes which bind to receptors on those cells and initiate a whole cascade of signals, ending in either the cell's death or growth. So nerve growth factors are really important in keeping your cells alive and well. And scientists have figured out that extracts of lion's mane mushrooms stimulate cell growth by making those growth factors better at their job. They basically tell your body to make more nerve growth factors so they can initiate more growth. For example, when scientists exposed adrenal cells from rats to the lion's mane extracts, they found that the cells grew more. And not just more than cells that didn't get any mushrooms, but even more than cells that were exposed to natural amounts of nerve growth factors. So mushroom extracts stimulated growth in those cells better than what they are exposed to in a healthy living rat. And that happens because they both stimulate activity in those nerve growth factors and mimic them, using compounds called haricinones to produce similar growth on their own. So they not only stimulate growth factors, but they also simulate growth factors. Through those methods, lion's mane mushrooms help brain cells grow bigger, extend outward to interact with other cells, and stay alive. And all those cellular benefits can translate to better brain function. A 2017 collaboration across Switzerland, Italy, and Slovenia found that supplementing mouse diets with lion's mane mushrooms for 2 months improved their memory. In that study, mice were fed mushrooms for 2 months and then observed as they performed a commonly used memory test. The mushroom-eating mice were drawn more toward new things, which suggested that they remembered the old stimuli better than mice that didn't eat a mushroom-enriched diet. So sometimes the data really does add up, because the experiments on cells in dishes lined up nicely with experiments on mice. Lion's mane mushrooms increased the creation of new cells in the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain, and improved memory. So those new cells are doing things. The same study found that mushroom consumption was also associated with brain cells in the hippocampus being more active and releasing more neurotransmitters. So brain cells were not only growing more to reach out and connect with more cells, but also actively communicating more with other cells. Now, in addition to apparently improving growth and communication, there's also evidence that some of these mushroom compounds may help your brain cells live longer. In brain cells and the brain's immune cells, there's an enzyme that causes inflammation and often leads to cell death. A Korean study on mice published in 2019 found that a low dose of lion's mane mushrooms decreased the number of brain cells expressing that enzyme, providing an anti-inflammatory effect and keeping those cells from dying. That effect comes from a different set of mushroom compounds called aranacines, which initiate another cascade of signals that reduces inflammation. So some cellular studies are pointing to haricinones, and some rodent studies are suggesting aranacines are the mushroom compounds to thank for improved brain cell function and memory. But what happens in us humans? Well, the mushrooms seem to provide similar benefits to us, but scientists aren't quite sure which compounds are creating those effects. In a 2019 Japanese study, people who took mushroom powder 4 times a day for 12 weeks scored higher on a memory test than the placebo group, and higher than they had scored before taking the supplements. And the growth factors that were so critical in cellular experiments are also deficient in people diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, so there may be some important implications for this research in the future. For now, evidence suggests that nerve growth factors are the proteins behind this mushroom's effect, but researchers still aren't quite sure how the mushroom makes them tick. Some researchers suspect that haricinones are major contributors because there are a lot of them in the fruiting part of the mushroom, and they're known to stimulate growth factors. Other compounds like aranacines have also been proposed because studies in human cells have found that haricinones alone don't provide the same benefits as whole mushrooms do, at least not at natural concentrations. And aranacines are known to stimulate growth factors. So researchers are still trying to figure out what exactly about the mushrooms leads to their restorative effect. It might be a combination of haricinones, aranacines, and maybe even others too. But either way, they tend to agree that lion's mane mushrooms have the potential to be really good brain food. Speaking of things that are good for your brain, thanks for watching this SciShow video. You can find more SciShow videos like this one on YouTube, and while you're there, you can buy or sell all sorts of cool products.
I eat them pretty frequently, yeah. I eat them pretty frequently.
29-year-old Will Crowther says mushrooms have been part of his routine for the last 6 years.
Well, they've really helped me in my life. They've really helped me, like lion's mane mushrooms specifically, which we have some right here, has really helped me in my life in terms of focusing.
Dr. Chris D'Adamo is the director of research at the University of Maryland Center for Integrative Medicine. He says mushrooms are a nutritional powerhouse.
They have a wide variety of properties that support human health. So they contain vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D.
They also contain antioxidants and anti-inflammatory properties.
And perhaps most interestingly, they have powerful immune-enhancing properties due to the polysaccharide glucans that they contain. And as a result, they've even been used as adjuvant cancer treatments.
Many of the mushrooms that you may not find in stores, you can find in coffees or elixirs and supplements. The reishi supplement is known to help with liver health. The lion's mane Will Crowther likes so much also comes in a supplement.
It increases nerve growth factor, which can help with cognitive function and neurodegenerative diseases.
And cordyceps have a profound impact on energy. In fact, Diadamo says Olympic athletes use it. He says shiitake mushrooms contain an alkaloid that can manage blood pressure. Maitake mushrooms have an enzyme that can help with blood sugar.
If you're a little less adventurous and would prefer just to stick with the white button mushroom, even these have been shown to have some potential benefits in stopping breast cancer cell proliferation.
While Crowther also takes supplements, he prefers to eat mushrooms and all kinds.
One of my favorite things to do is combine it with like spring onions and avocado. I'm trying to get the most bang for my buck for real, like in terms of the protein and all the nutrients in it. And mushrooms, they might seem expensive in the when you go to buy them, but they're really not.
When selecting fresh mushrooms, try to buy organic if you can and cook them, because cooking makes them easier to digest and deactivates a compound that can be problematic in large amounts. Dr. Diadamo says one of the best ways to make them is saute them with onions, garlic, and coconut oil for strong immune enhancement. Lisa Robinson, WBAL TV 11 News.
Sounds good. Never knew they could do so many things, though. It's pretty impressive. So the question, though, how much mushroom do you need to consume for those benefits we talked about? Dr. Diamo says some studies have shown eating them a couple times a week in stir fry or as a side dish is enough to give your immune system an extra boost and general health promoting benefit.
Mushrooms are wonderful to keep on hand because the subtle, nutty flavor can enhance so many dishes. Whether you like to add mushrooms on top of frozen pizzas, toss them into salads, or add them to risottos, there are so many ways to cook with mushrooms. There are a few common mistakes people tend to make when cooking mushrooms, however. For the best results, you'll want to steer clear of these mishaps. One of the biggest mistakes is that people like to wash their mushrooms before cooking them. The truth is that mushrooms have a ton of water in them already, and thanks to their texture, mushrooms act like sponges. That means they take on even more water when washed and become waterlogged. It's much better to simply brush them off with a damp paper towel instead of washing them. Another water-related mistake people make is cooking mushrooms slowly on low heat. This causes the extra moisture inside the mushrooms to leak out, so the fungi get steamed more than anything. That will only give you soggy mushrooms, when ideally all of the water should be evaporated before they come off the stovetop. Water is your biggest enemy when cooking mushrooms, and water-related mistakes are the biggest problem most people encounter while cooking mushrooms. There are, however, a few other common mistakes that can compromise or just prevent your mushrooms from being the absolute best they can be. One of those more minor problems is slicing. That's not the only way to go when preparing mushrooms. Some mushrooms, especially smaller ones, are great whole. Other mushrooms with great texture, which are usually wilder-looking mushrooms, are delicious when torn, instead of sliced or quartered. Two of the last and more common mistakes are overcrowding the pan and not using enough oil. Similar to having too much water in the pan, when mushrooms are overcrowded, there is not enough space for the water to evaporate. This is another way the mushrooms can sit and simmer for a soggy finish. Just as it's easy to have too much water in the pan, it's easy to not have enough oil in the pan. Remember, mushrooms are like sponges, so they'll soak up all of the oil in the pan if there is only a little. That's why it's important to use enough. Should you add the appropriate amount of oil to the pan and avoid crowding the mushrooms, you're not exactly away from the danger of poorly cooking your mushrooms. Another common mistake people make while cooking mushrooms is not leaving them on the heat long enough. It is actually quite easy to undercook your mushrooms. The reason you want to make sure you cook the mushrooms for long enough is that they will be more flavorful when the excess liquid is cooked out. Since mushrooms do contain so much liquid, you want to leave them on the heat long enough to get rid of the unwanted liquid and let them caramelize, making them delicious. Just keep an eye on them so they don't overcook either.
I'm freaking out right now, man. The mushrooms are turning on me.
One more thing to keep in mind while cooking mushrooms is that you don't want to salt the mushrooms as soon as they are in the pan. This causes the water to be drawn out of the mushrooms, which can cause the fungi to become tough. Plus, the mushrooms will have less flavor. You want to add salt when they've caramelized and the liquid has cooked out. This will ensure they have great color, flavor, and texture. While it's certainly a game changer to know how to handle mushrooms when cooking them, it's equally important to know how to care for them before they hit the stovetop. Mushrooms need to be bought carefully and stored properly to ensure they will be their best selves after they're cooked. The first tip to ensure your mushrooms will come out perfectly is to avoid buying pre-packaged mushrooms. When you buy loose mushrooms, you can limit the amount based on what you need, and it will allow you to select and eat them at their best. It's also cheaper to buy loose mushrooms. Finally, if you can only buy mushrooms in plastic bags or pre-packaged in plastic, make sure you remove them from the plastic to store them. The plastic locks in moisture, and the containers are actually too damp for the mushrooms to be stored for long. The excess moisture is actually what causes your newly purchased mushrooms to turn moldy and go soft. Use a paper bag to store mushrooms instead, since it will absorb extra moisture while affording better air circulation.
And a half ago, this thing was the size of the tip of my pinky. There's been stories of toxic waste cleanup by mushrooms. Without mushrooms, we would be overrun with waste. There would not be any life on Earth. Ganoderma lucidum stricto, it's known as the mushroom of immortality. They're antiviral, antibacterial. It's been shown to shrink and terminate tumor growth. Yeah, we do about 180 bags per cycle, and we do that 3 times a week. Yeah, this used to be done in my house. Yeah, we have some shiitake mushrooms right here that are ready to go.
There's thousands of ways that these guys can save our world and make our environment that much better to live in.
Cultivating fungi and mushrooms is like a balance between science and art. I'm going to be taking a look inside of my, this is the spawn incubation / culture media room, and I'm just going to select out some cultures for today and take a look at some of my spawn. Today, I will be taking little pieces of tissue from these plates and dropping them into nutrient media broths to basically expand the mycelium. Yeah, my name is Michael Crow, and I own Southwest Mushrooms. Here we cultivate a wide variety of gourmet and medicinal mushrooms. Yeah, we just dropped a couple chunks of mycelium tissue of cordyceps. Mycology is the study of fungi and basically the growth of different fungi. People don't realize that there is such a wide array of different mushrooms out there. Molds and fungi starts from spores rather than seed. 2 compatible spores will mate and form mycelium. The mycelium starts out, we plant it on a petri dish, and from there we transfer healthy sectors of mycelium into bags of sterilized grain. Here we have organic wheat berries that we use. From there, mycelium will spread and devour whatever food source that it's working with. Full colonization occurs. You'll see a big, nice, healthy bag of white mycelium. This can get broken up and utilized to inoculate anywhere from 20 to 30 of our production blocks. Without good spawn, you don't have mushrooms. A lot of people that will try to get into growing mushrooms because they've grown like a lot of plants before think that, it'll be basically like kind of similar, but it's definitely totally different. You're germinating spores on petri dishes, you're growing out the mycelium, you're doing transfers into like sterilized grain substrates as opposed to soils. Yeah, this is our production area. This is where our substrate gets made. We use a blend of oak hardwood sawdust plus added supplements like organic wheat bran and certain seed hulls to basically formulate our substrate to get the maximum efficiency from our mushrooms. Bags are filled up to approximately 10 to 12 pounds, and then from there we make our way into the sterilization area where the substrate will be sterilized for a prolonged period of time to make sure we kill off any microorganisms or competitor molds or fungi. Nothing's needed, it's all sterile, so you don't need to use any kind of like pesticides or any kind of fertilizers or additives. You have to really take a lot of care into making sure that you're only growing the fungi that you desire. This is the sterilization room. This is where we sterilize all of our substrate. In here we can sterilize up to 1,600 pounds of fresh substrate at a time, and basically steam comes through and sterilizes at a high temperature, about 212 degrees. If it's not sterilized properly, you'll take it in to inoculate and you'll run into a lot of contamination problems and molds outgrowing your mycelium. We have our spawn right here. This is a California reishi. So we'll take our spawn and just kind of break it up, separate each individual grain, and allow that to become a vehicle for our mycelium. So I'll take a scalpel and then I'll heat sterilize it. The HEPA filter right here is basically providing us just a clean workspace to perform our inoculations. So we're getting a stream of sterile air. It's eyeballed. I'm pretty good at eyeballing it, so that's what I do. So yeah, the bag's placed in front of the flow hood, inflated with a little bit of that sterile air, and then sealed. All right, so now our bag's inoculated, and we're just gonna wanna shake it up. All right, our bag's done. People think that all mushrooms are grown in the dark, on manure. We have wood-loving mushrooms that can grow on insects, and mycorrhizal species of mushrooms that can connect with like different plants. This area is our shiitake incubation area. The shiitake generally takes 8 weeks before we can get into the fruiting room. We can see the mushrooms at this stage beginning to like popcorn. As the mushroom begins to mature, you let the blocks ripen and they begin to turn brown. And this is a block that's ready to go into our fruiting room. It's ripe and ready. Yeah, generally a lot of new growers will mistake the brown for contamination, but that's actually just the mycelium ripening and getting ready to produce a good crop of mushrooms. And yeah, over here we have some freshly inoculated blocks. We can see the mycelium starting to jump off from the grain that it was inoculated with and looking for sawdust to basically break down and utilize as a food source. In nature, you'd find oyster mushrooms growing off of the sides of trees. So here we kind of try to simulate that way of growth with this block. Inside is oak hardwood sawdust, and the bag kind of acts as an artificial bark, tree bark. So when we give it an incision, it kind of just acts as in nature when the mycelium starts poking out at the right points and receiving the right O2 levels that sends mushrooms out. Once it completely devours all of its food source, the mycelium signals to produce mushrooms. Basically, the mushrooms will start pinning within a few days. You'll start to see a bunch of little baby mushrooms forming all over the block. Usually they'll have like a stem and a cap. Underneath the cap will be the gills, and the gills are responsible for like producing all the spores that the mushroom will utilize to continue the life cycle. We grow mushrooms that in nature you'd find them growing right in the forest, right off of the sides of different trees. So we try to give these mushrooms a little bit of light stimulation, kind of just similar to what you'd get in like a shaded part of the forest. What we do is as our blocks are ready to go in the grow room, we slap our blocks with our hands to basically stimulate the tree falling in nature to shock the mycelium into growing. Once the tree or branch would hit the floor, the mycelium would be shocked into producing the mushrooms because it's basically thinking that its life cycle is coming to an end. That's what mushrooms do. They're basically nature's like grand decomposers. Their job is to break things down and turn it into organic material that can be reused by the environment. There's been stories of toxic waste cleanup by mushrooms, mushrooms being able to break down oils, kind of like the immune system for the planet. Also plastics in the environment. Without mushrooms, we would be overrun with waste. Basically, there would not be any life on Earth. Mushrooms are very crucial to the environment and ecosystem. I started when I was about 15. I just got interested in mushrooms, picked up a couple books, and was just really fascinated by the whole process. How something can just start from spores, something that we really can't see with the naked eye, into just being able to devour things at such a fast rate and produce these mushrooms. And by the time I was 16, I was growing mushrooms as a hobby and just became really hooked on the process. So I started this business after selling some stocks and cashing out my 401k. So I wanted to continue working with mushrooms as for life, I guess, and kind of make it a career path. So now I'll just harvest the mushrooms just by simply cutting as close to the base of the block as possible. And then from there we can go ahead and pack everything in the next warehouse and get everything to the desired weights. Creminis and button mushrooms and portobellos, those are secondary decomposing mushrooms. So those mushrooms desire like manure or compost-based substrates. You wouldn't want to keep that stuff under the same roof just because you don't want any kind of cross-contamination getting into your grows. So yeah, we're just specializing in wood-loving species, so species that basically decompose hardwood in nature. You'll find them growing off like fresh trees or basically recently fallen trees. And those strains are like shiitake, oyster mushrooms, more of the medicinal species such as reishi, turkey tail, lion's mane. You'll find maitake growing on oak or in certain hardwoods. Also, the medicinal benefits that they offer are far greater than what you'd find in like a portobello or cremini mushroom. These are the mushrooms that contain those anti-cancer, anti-tumor benefits, those immunomodulating, immune system enhancing benefits. They're antiviral, antibacterial. Like reishi specifically is used in like chemotherapy and cancer treatments. It's been shown to shrink and terminate tumor growth. A lot of people that have compromised immune systems are able to utilize certain mushrooms like shiitake, for instance, has been shown to dramatically increase like production of necessary T helper cells to help fight off infection and keep your body safe. This is called Ganoderma sicile. This is a reishi species from Palmer Woods near Michigan. And this mushroom is mainly used for the medicinal benefits. We can take it and brew it into a tea or make tinctures out of it and utilize it for the health properties. A lot of mushrooms have their own unique like health benefits that you can only get from that mushroom. It's been used by Eastern medicine for about 4,000 years. Shiitake, for instance, produces a polysaccharide called lentin, and that's something that you can only get from shiitake. Oyster mushrooms produce a compound called lovastatin, which naturally reduces blood pressure. Lion's mane produces hericinones and erinacines, which is able to stimulate nerve growth factor in the brain. Well, here's our lion's mane, also called Hericium erinaceus. It's a wonderful teeth fungi. The mushroom is a medicinal mushroom as well as a culinary delight. It's known for the fact that it can enhance cognitive function, boost your memory, basically enabling people to recover from traumatic brain injuries, helping people deal with Alzheimer's, dementia. We got some regulars out there that love our lion's mane powder and all of our products, really. It just started with like the farmers markets and everybody just being really amazed by our quality of mushrooms. And from there, like chefs started asking us about mushrooms, so we started dealing with chefs, and then now our mushrooms are making it to grocery stores and restaurants all over the state. Now the reishi is definitely an intensive harvest. So we'll just cut each antler off at the base of the block. It's kind of like a forest of reishi down there. But patience and time. And then there we have the cut right there. And we have a little bit of sawdust attached, so I'll just trim this off. It shows that it really breaks down the substrate into almost a pulp-like matter, ready to begin composting into soil. Yeah, this is the most aggressive reishi that we have. Cultivating fungi and mushrooms is like a balance between science and art. One, you got to understand the science of it, and two, the art of it is basically being able to execute your crop the right way. If you have a passion and you want to turn it into a business, then don't let anything stop you. Ganoderma sicile. This is a reishi